Welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast by Scott McDonald and DrDemographics.com, the best source of demographic, psychographic, and marketing information for professionals.
Hello, this is Scott McDonald at DrDemographics.com, and welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast. Now, in these podcasts, I try to provide as many insights as I possibly can into real locations that are showing promise in one way or another. Now, we do this for practice purchases as well as for startups. And I want to offer you just a little free advice, particularly to students and to associates who are trying to figure out their options. And in case you don't know, I work with a great many dentists who are trying to figure out what life after the military will be, what life after dental school is going to be like, and for those who want to get out there on their own. Now, later in the year, I will be designing a range of services for those who consider themselves a little short of cash. Yes, I realize you're poor and in debt. Now, this is going to include students and associates or on several research products. But I hope you won't take advantage of us by doing this. I want you to be honest now. Remember, all of this costs us money, so please, just remember, everybody has to make a profit here. Now, I get many questions about whether or not a specific location will work from the standpoint of a scratch practice. In other words, where there has not been a practice before. And I wanted to devote a session to looking at the metrics that will determine that viability. So this is what this is about. Now, there are some great practices for sale, but to be honest, in many parts of the country are just plain old overpriced. And that's a discussion for another session. For now, I want to give you a realistic understanding of what I look at when it comes to startup locations. I know there are experts out there who want to tell you everything. Trust me, I do this every day. Number one, the first mistake that many dentists make when looking at a location is considering competition as the holy grail. Just because there is little competition is no guarantee of demand within the geographic area you're looking. While there may be a correlation between limited competition and the potential in an area, this can still be tricky because the correlation may not be strong. You may recall a podcast session on this specific topic some time ago. Competition does not promise demand. Sure, you don't want to ignore competition, but it must be kept in balance. A nice ratio for a dentist is one dentist per 1,400 residents in a middle-class, middle-income location. That's reasonable. On the other hand, when the ratio gets to 3,000 to 1, you had better figure out why there is so little competition. Of course, in a terrific area, you can go down to 1 to 900. Number two, there is an idea that if the compensation rate is favorable, that a dental practice will be profitable. The correlation between the rate and profitability is also pretty tenuous. Most of the time, the doctors who are drawn to the money alone seem to forget the 800-pound gorilla, which is also known as the cost of doing business. Now, to illustrate the point, it is possible that the compensation rate will be 20% higher in one state than another. But if the cost of doing business is 40% higher, things are going to be, pretty rough. And by the way, that 40% difference in cost of doing business is not unusual. In short, it is true that insurance compensation is better in some places, but the cost of rent, cost of employees, and the cost of attracting patients, given those numbers, the amount of the difference will usually mean the cost of doing business will be significantly higher. It is a statistic that seems to be ignored regularly at the peril of a new practice. Sure, when your practice is mature and it is producing well without having to do amazingly difficult things, profitability may be and probably will be greater. But especially during the first 3 years of practice, the practice is more vulnerable. It would be great if you could get your overhead to 50% of production. I realize that. Believe me, I do. But that is not realistic during that startup period. In my opinion, at very least, you likely cannot achieve that overhead threshold for 5 years, even in a very good location. So let's be realistic. Don't kick yourself. Number 3, I have been hitting the drum pretty hard about growth being a prerequisite for a startup. If growth is slow or very little, and I mean less than 0.5% per year, the demographic character of the local population will be changing. In other words, it won't stay the same. Most of the time, but not always, this seems to be caused by a rising cost of living. This is most often reflected in the price of housing, but it can also be seen in rising wages of your employees. The natural result is that these areas will start looking older. Only older people can afford the homes that are rising in value. Young families, particularly those with children, cannot afford to buy these homes, and therefore the median age is increasing. Think about Long Island. Think about Central California. The people of Greater Boston are not getting poorer, they're getting older. Now, the same is true of Chicago. The same is true in California's Bay Area, Palo Alto, San Francisco, Oakland. The younger families are moving out and are not moving back in. I mean, they're not being replaced by younger families. They're looking for locations that they can afford to settle down in neighborhoods that they like, that they feel safe in. So no growth means an aging population. How much growth do you want for a startup practice location? Well, I'm actually going to put a metric on it. Ideally, it would be 3% growth per year with a base population at no smaller than 2,500 residents and preferably higher. I really like it over 5,000. Finding anything with a growth rate below 1.5%, if you're looking for a growth-oriented practice, it's going to be risky. You need a churning rate of about twice that at 3%. You want to review my episode on churning to get background on this issue. Now, besides, locations with less than these growth statistics are going to find that number and percentage of patients in play, meaning that they have no long-term relationship with another dentist. It will be greatly diminished. Now, number 4. For many years, there has been an imperative to choose a dental practice in the middle of an area dominated by single-family, owner-occupied housing. I get that. But this is the profile that is getting so expensive for younger families. They just can't afford to move into them. Often they're having to choose to rent. And they are being found further and further from the urban centers that offer significant job opportunities. This is making the traditional nuclear families move further and further out from the core where they're employed. This is making many large employers rethink their city-centric strategies. In other words, they're following the people. Their costs are going up, and so is the demand for well-educated, stable employees. This is working for you. In short, they're moving to the suburbs as well. As an aside, this has had the effect of hurting big city tax rolls as people move away, and they do not want you to know this. The bottom line is that the new employment hubs are found outside of the big cities in the new suburbs, and this is precisely where dentists should be looking for startup opportunities. For this reason, demographers are recommending locations that have a lower population density. They're also looking at newer housing, even if it's multifamily housing, and well-educated populations. Now, when this occurs, the crime rates always go down, which enhances the quality of life for these young families and realigns the old political machines in the big cities. Now, number 5. How can you tell if people will be faithful and consistent dental patients? I know how. This is one metric that we believe has been considered above all others in finding that type of person. Not money, educational attainment. And I've said it often that it is not so much that people with education are smarter than those with less schooling. Rather, education forces a person to have a different perception of life. 6 or more years of education beyond high school is really an indication that people have thought with a perspective that is much longer. It's much further out. And by the way, this also goes for trade schools. It has always been true that pain is an effective motivator for seeking dental care. We all get that. Preventive care does not have one of these handy, tidy reminders, such as those that keep you awake all night, thinking about, I gotta go to the dentist. Therefore, educational attainment is really a positive indicator for a startup practice. Now, I started tracking this closely about 15 years ago, and it has paid off handsomely in giving us the best results for new practices than we could have ever imagined. Now, before I go, I just want to remind you about our enhanced telephone consultation. For a limited time, we are offering the consultations via video conference at no extra cost. You can see the maps and the data that we're using to advise our doctors. The consultations take, very little time really to schedule, sometimes as little as 48 hours, and are among the least expensive ways to get definitive answers on sites and to get your project back on track. I'm even doing facilitator consultations for partnership formation and even for staff meetings. I'd like you to check it out. Now, quick thing, our 800 number went on the fritz. I blame our provider, but that's going to be up in a couple of days, so in case you get this and can't reach us at 800-424-6222, have patience. And thanks so much for watching.